Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. One of the things I've been talking about is the different kinds of narcissistic relationships. They're all toxic, but they all have a different feel. Today I'm going to talk about a specific kind of relationship that I can only call the cult of two. One cult, two people. So let's break that down. What is this cult of two relationship, and what's it like if you're in it? As always, if you're new to this channel, please join our wonderful community and hit that subscribe button. Let's talk about this cult of two. And talking about these different kinds of relationships is just meant to give you a way of saying, not all these relationships are the same. One thing we know, I can say I'll say all cult leaders are either narcissistic or psychopathic. It's a given. Charm plus charisma plus love bombing plus manipulation plus gaslighting plus isolation with people who are being controlled equals cult. It also sounds like a narcissistic relationship, right? Because as anyone knows, also, most narcissistic family systems are also run like cults. Smaller than your usual cult, perhaps with one narcissistic parent / cult leader, but one person at a minimum who hijacks all reality. Everyone lives in fear of them and wants to please them, and people in the family tend to be isolated from the world. And all of this distorts the reality of everyone in the family, who will often have a difficult time developing a sense of identity and a sense of self outside of the family system. But the cult of two is a narcissistic relationship, typically a romantic relationship, but it could be a friendship or a workplace relationship. But in the cult of two relationship, you have a grandiose, charismatic, narcissistic person and the other person who is so brainwashed and trauma bonded that they really don't get what's happening here, or they don't want to get what's happening in the relationship, because it may mean having to get out of the relationship, and they don't want to do that. The cult of two is a unique relationship, and frankly, people who are currently in a cult of two type relationship are probably not watching this video because they may not even identify their partner as narcissistic, but some of you may have come out of these relationships. The non-narcissistic or the less narcissistic person in the relationship may defend the cult of two relationship to other people. They may distance from people who may worry about this relationship, or they may be isolated from other people by the narcissistic partner. They may even tell other people how great or smart or visionary their partner or their friend is, and that can also result in further isolation, because other people may be observing the sort of culty toxicity in the relationship and may distance themselves from this relationship and that person who's in the relationship. In the cult of two relationship, it is quite likely that the gaslighting has been so chronic, long-term, and destabilizing that the person simply has surrendered all sense of self to the relationship, not voluntarily, but largely for survival purposes, and not feeling safe or simply not being able to exert themselves in the relationship or express any of their needs in the relationship. For a person whose relationships have historically been characterized by narcissism, for example, from a family of origin, the idea of standing your ground in one of these cult of two relationships can feel all but impossible. Now, I love Daniel Shaw's definition of a cult or a cult-like relationship, because in his writing he opens it up, this concept of a cult, really being as simple as one leader and one follower. So I'm going to quote and paraphrase him here. He said that in this kind of cult-like relationship, the leader pushes the other person in the relationship to follow them and support their mission. The other person in this relationship then has to suppress their reality and make themselves into whatever the narcissist wants them to be. The person who's in the relationship with the narcissist is constantly supporting the grandiosity of the narcissist, who takes advantage of the other person. Shaw goes on to say that the cult-like relationship is really about carrots and sticks. The carrot is what the person thinks they can get from the narcissist just by being in the relationship. Whatever they think would come from being close to the narcissistic person. Maybe all of that love bomb stuff that you were given or promised, or just being close to their so-called greatness. And the sticks are when the narcissist threatens to abandon you or end the relationship if you actually push back and acknowledge your own reality, or criticize them, or acknowledge you're being humiliated. In the cult-like relationship, the patterns include humiliation, devaluation, dismissiveness, and they try to keep you in your place. We also observe the narcissistic person using tools like perfectionism to control the other person. It's a really interesting dynamic. Narcissistic relationships often involve an expectation of perfection, which is obviously impossible. So anyone in a narcissistic relationship is always left with a feeling of being not enough because the bar is set to perfection by the narcissist. And interestingly, the narcissistic person also holds the same standard for themselves. Just like anyone else, they can't achieve it. But because they they believe in perfectionism, they believe they're perfect. So that sort of pumps up their grandiosity even further because they're sort of living into this false standard of perfectionism that they have. But in all narcissistic relationships, especially these cult of two relationships, this constant sense of being not enough and believing that there is something else you can do to be perfect becomes a way to avoid criticism and win the narcissist over. In some moments, you may actually get something just right, and the narcissist may even recognize it, and that might even feel extraordinary. But it's not sustainable, and it's just a matter of time before you are not perfect again. This belief that you could actually be perfect to suit the needs of the cult leader in the relationship means that you devote yourself to doing this, and the cult of two relationship basically overtakes your life. These cult of two people relationships are also all encompassing. People in these kinds of narcissistic relationships give all of their time to the relationship. This makes it impossible to cultivate social support outside of the relationship or to excel at a job or at school. In a way, these relationships become a form of psychological servitude in which you are constantly living in service to the narcissist. Over time, because of the impossible demands of obedience, perfectionism, and the fantasy of winning over the narcissistic cult-like person, you are constantly giving up more and more ground until there is no more ground to give. As in any trauma-bonded relationship, the alternation between good and bad, between idealization and rejection, that's what keeps it going. And that dance is what keeps people stuck. The good moments are followed by humiliation. And people in these cult of two relationships learn that any good moments are going to inevitably be followed by a crash. These are dangerous relationships, and they often have elements of coercive control. Many times, people in these cult of two relationships have something that they really admire in the narcissistic person. They may view this person as smart, or this narcissist may be a communal narcissist who wants to save the world, or who has some grand vision of the world, or they may have some talent, be successful, be respected by a community of enablers. They may sell a good message. They may be some kind of new age healer, or be totally focused on personal growth at a new level. However, the person in the relationship who wants to support, share in, and learn from this cult-like narcissistic person may over time find themselves devaluing themselves and enduring more and more abuse. This cult of two relationship can also be observed in family systems, one-on-one relationships in abusive workplaces, and in spiritual communities. They are manipulative, dangerous, and unhealthy relationships that can do a real number on your mental health and can often get people isolated, cut off aspirations, make people financially dependent, or even put them in financial peril as they hand over all of their resources to the more culty narcissist. If you grew up in a family where there was a cult of two between your parents, the only way to survive may have been to fall into line with the narcissistic parent's needs, domination, and control, because the other parent had already fallen into line a long time ago and was not going to be able to advocate for their children. So the children almost inevitably become the next set of cult members that narcissistic parent is recruiting. It can be devastating to look back and reflect on how unprotected you would have been and were in such a childhood, in such a family. While I do believe that narcissistic relationships have the top note of always being a cult of two or three or more, these truly cult of two relationships have some specific patterns of losing any sense of reality and identity, giving over to the charismatic narcissistic person, losing yourself, believing in the grandiose promises and aspirations of the narcissistic person, and being subject to their whims and demands to the point where there is very little left of you. Be very careful, and no matter how aspirational and amazing someone is, if they have to devalue you as part of who they are, that's unacceptable. Nobody is worth that, no matter how important they may seem. I hope that makes sense, but these cult of two relationships, while I know all narcissistic relationships feel like a cult, some of them really, really do. Thanks again.